Welcome to our weekly podcast, our weekly shir on the teachings of the Holy Baal Shemtov. And today is the day before Lag BaOmer, before the day that marks the passing of the Holy Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the great sage and mystic who brought to us the teachings of Kabbalah. And on that note, it's also known that the one to follow the teachings of Kabbalah and bring it into the layman's language to the degree where today so much of the teachings that were only available to a very small group of people at some point in history. Now today, this is available to people in all different languages, in all different ways and forms. And this occurred primarily in the last 300 years. In other words, although Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, first authored the Zohar well over 1,500 years ago, nevertheless, the publicizing of its teachings, especially its mysteries, were only taught to a select few throughout history because of reasons that is not for now. But then came the Holy Baal Shemtov, and it was his mission, and it is his mission to impart these ideas and teachings that give us a deeper understanding and an insight into that which is very much within the mystery for most of us. So, having said that, by divine providence, a while ago now, I was with a very dear friend of mine, Beryl Nesanya Ben Sheva, and he's a producer. And I asked him to open up the Keser Shemtov, to open up the book of the teachings of the Baal Shemtov. And he opened up to a page which was so interesting to me because it was so different from so many of the teachings that I have learned in that book over the years, as you will likely see yourself from the nature of what I'm about to read. But having said that, as within all teachings of the Holy Baal Shemtov, there's a great deal of depth implied in the metaphors that he gives forward. And today, by divine providence, this is the teaching that came before me, translated by Rabbi Moshe Wishnevsky, who is the author of the commentary on the teachings of the Arizal in the book of Apples from the Orchard, and also the editor-in-chief of the Rebbe's Chumash, the teachings of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses and the prophets that we read on a weekly basis, and the interpolation that is profound in the Kahot edition, K-E-H-O-T, which of course you can look up online. So without any further ado, here is the metaphor from the Holy Baal Shemtov, may his merit be a blessing. And this is what the author writes. I heard from my teacher, the Holy Baal Shemtov, a parable of a merchant who was at sea. The sea was so stormy that his life was in danger. So the merchant prayed to be saved in the merit of his modest wife. There was a Gentile there who asked the merchant why he prayed in his wife's merit. And the Jew replied that she truly deserves to be exceedingly praised for her modesty. The fellow said, really? I will go and try to seduce her. What sign do you want from her as a proof that I succeeded." So the Jew replied that his wife had a valuable ring, and that if this guy, this Gentile fellow is putting him up to the test, could bring it back to him, he'll know that she succumbed. So they agreed. They agreed that whoever loses the bet will give all his merchandise to the winner. This fellow, let's call him Harvey, not Jewish. It's the guy who put this guy who was praying up to the test, okay? So Harvey tried to approach her several times. He went to this fellow's wife, but he found that it was too hard to even have access to her. He tried saying that he had a secret message from her husband, but she still paid no attention to him. Frustrated, he bribed her servant girl to steal the ring from her, using some tricks he had devised. He then gave the ring to her husband, and having won the bet, he took his merchandise from him, and thus the Jew came home empty-handed. Hearing that her husband was coming, the wife adorned herself and went out to greet him with the words of desire and love that they usually exchanged. But none of this impressed him, leaving her puzzled why he no longer expressed affection for her and love for her. He went home with her, but was cold-hearted towards her. Of course, that's because he had suspected her to have fallen through with Harvey. But he didn't say anything to her about that. Eventually, he sent her away to sea in a ship on a sea without a captain. But unbeknownst to her, he, her husband, disguised himself and spoke with a false accent, pretending to be one of the ship's sailors, sailing the ship himself. She spent several days on the ship without food or drink, until she came to the, quote, sailor, of course not knowing it's her husband, to give her a little food to restore her strength. So he told her, "Kiss me, and I'll give you the food." And she did so with having no choice. He then demanded that she have relations with him. Eventually, the ship arrived at the seashore, and she fled the ship, jumping to the shore, and looked for food. She found 2 trees, one whose fruit made the eater leprous, and the other whose fruit cured the eater of leprosy. She took the latter type of fruit in her backpack and went to the king disguised as a man. The king needed this medicine, so she cured him with this fruit, and in gratitude, the king gave her a great fortune. She then returned home and found her husband and scolded him for having done what he did to her, sending her away in a ship with an ugly sailor whom she was forced to kiss and other disgusting things in order to alleviate her hunger pains. The husband rejoiced over her great indignation and modesty, and now he was convinced of her fidelity, and because of which he went to investigate the matter and indeed found out that Harvey actually lied to him. He lied to her, and that he had actually really stolen her ring. When the truth was proven, he had Harvey punished. And now the Baal Shemtov concludes. The analogy is clear, referring to the history of the Jewish people throughout the world, from the time of the destruction of the temple until the coming of our Messiah speedily in our days. Amen. Selah. My teacher, the Baal Shemtov, once elevated his soul to the supernal realms and saw how the angel Michael, the great advocate of the Jewish people, was defending the Jewish people by saying that every demerit of theirs is really a merit, because whatever untoward deed it may seem that they do is really only in order, for example, procure enough money, do betroth their daughters to a Torah scholar or give tzedakah, charity, or the like. And the angel goes on, it's not their fault. They are forced to do these things because of the pressure of their exile. In the parable, the modest wife is the Shekhinah, and its earthly manifestation, the collective soul of the children of Israel. In the mystical secret, a proper wife is the crown of her husband. The Jewish people, when the temple stood, served God faithfully, and thereby increased Hashem's power or merit, so to speak, to be revealed in the world. But then the force of the darkness, its chief, the Satan represented in the parable by the Gentile sailor, became jealous, saying that the Jewish people are indeed faithful to God now that they have a temple and sacrifices, and they could see all the great revelations of God's glory. But Satan said to Hashem, if you want to test them, destroy the temple and let me seduce them to serve idols, etc. The theft of the ring by the servant girl corresponds to the loss cast between the two goats on Yom Kippur, one that was sacrificed on the altar in the holy temple on offering to Hashem, and one, as we know, that was sent to the mountain of Azazel. Satan contrived to make the Jewish people to sin, even though what they did was for good intentions. And thus, when the Jewish people were sinful, the lot for God came up in the high priest's left hand, which is usually not a good omen, and the temple was destroyed, as Rambam writes in his commentary. Hashem sent us away from the land of Israel in a ship, going back to the metaphor, but as it were accompanied us and disguised himself, but as it were accompanied us, so to speak, because we know that Hashem is always with us, even though in the times that we're in now are in a state of concealment. But nevertheless, Hashem is with us sometimes disguised, just like in the story of the ship, by cloaking himself in, and this is the 45th of the 72 divine names that are encoded in Exodus. Now that's the having to do with something that you can read about in the Apples from the Orchard. But there are different names of God through which God operates in terms of dispersing divine energy into the world that we live in. And those names are implied in a very direct code in the verses that precede the song of the sea that was sung by Moses and the Jewish people after or during the time of the splitting of the sea. And this name denotes how Hashem assumes the role of Satan in order to test the Jewish people. Thus, the temptations we experience during exile are really Hashem disguising himself as these temptations to enable us to prove our fidelity to our faith, to our trust in Hashem. And as opportunities to show that even if, God forbid, we did succumb to them, it's not because of any, God forbid, desire to rebel against Hashem, but only due to our thinking that this is the only way that we can achieve our spiritual sanity, even though it's coming from the Satan. This is the secret of the confession, which is really the Shekhinah scolding God for having forced her to sin against her will. I didn't remember that part. Let's do that again. This is the secret of the confession, which is really the Shekhinah scolding Hashem for having forced her to sin against her will. And then it became clear that Satan's accusations were lies, and then the prophetic promise will be fulfilled. There will be a slaughtering for Hashem and Basra, meaning that Hashem will take vengeance on Satan, slaughtering him and destroying him, as the Jew did to Harvey in the parable. Well, he didn't, but he had done because of the justice and the horrible what he caused. But anyway, it's a parable, and that's so interesting because we just said on one hand that it's the Satan is part of Hashem, and then in the same time the prophecy from Isaiah, something to think about. And to conclude, the words of the wise. Yeah. Yeah. The words of a wise man are graceful. This parable pierces and goes down to the depths, meaning that it is impossible to exhaust its message. Understand it. All right, so that means that however you may have understood the words that I shared with you up until now, it's worthwhile to listen to it again and again, because there's something very powerful in this. And the simplicity of it is that when one is on the path of connecting to Hashem, there are all different types of thought processes that go through, and some people start having negative thinking, oh, well, I'm not doing this or that, so why should I do this or that? And does it mean that it's not authentic, etc.? And in one of the lessons that I'm taking from this particular teaching is that it's acknowledging the fact that whatever it is that we're doing is because we're so thirsty, and because of the thirst pains, which, you go on the internet and watch some of the testimonies of those who went through the Holocaust, and you hear about it being one of the worst experiences of lacking drink and lacking food. So this gives us the idea to use that as as an example to the spiritual thirst that we have. And in fact, whatever it is that we run after in life that's corporeal or other primal things, as was mentioned in this teaching, it's not because of the fact that we want to distance ourselves away from Hashem and the Torah, God forbid, but rather because we're looking so hard to satiate the thirst pains and the hunger pains. And what could we do? We're in the blind to the degree where we think we're getting it watered from other places, although unfortunately it's very much not so often. All right, well, have a happy Lag BaOmer, and if you have any questions and comments, you're welcome to share that with us, share that with me, rabbi@jewishmalibu.com, and